think for me, this session really is just all about a bit of nostalgia. And one of the reasons that I brought the book with me, aside from just having the opportunity just to flick through the pages and look at some of the lovely old pictures while I'm down here of, you know, the same views that we're sat in now, the same tree line markers and that out there, is that it had some really interesting technical and tactical thinking and some bait recipes in here. And I'm pretty sure that this was the first sort of proper carp book that I bought, and it was published in '94, so I'd have been 14 years old. I remember buying it pretty much straight away as soon as it came out, because I used to get Carp World religiously every month back then, and I'd seen it advertised in there, I reckon. And, you know, being an impressionable teenager, I based a lot of my thinking for a good while after on some of the stuff that was in here, in particular the two baits. His main fish meal bait, which was big fish mix with garlic mint, a bit of extra robin red and some GLM, which I used for years, caught loads of carp on that. And the other thing was his recipe for his fruity specials, which Tim actually kind of used to use as a bit of a winter bait, I think. But he did make reference to them as an irresistible attractor bait. And back then in the Northwest, you know, some of the lads were already using these kind of heavily over-flavoured singles, but I think, as far as I can remember at least anyway, this is one of the first kind of references I'd seen to an actual recipe that had that sort of multi-layered complex blend of liquids and attractors in it. So I duly went out, bought all the bits and bobs, rolled some, caught plenty of carp on it, and it kind of informed my thinking for a good few years after. I had a little root around in the shed when I was digging out some of the old liquids, and actually found a pot of my original Fizz and Harvest IBs that they've got to be at least 20 years old, if not, I don't know, 22, 24 years old maybe. Late 90s that I rolled them. Amazingly, they still smell relatively good as well. Like, it's probably a little bit contentious this, because I know a lot of people out there still use some of the old flavours, and especially in the last few years, you know, there's been a bit of a kind of buzz and hype about the old flavour blends and this, that and the other, but for a long time now, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years, like, I've based all my fishing on using fresh liquids and new blends. So I just got to the point where I was convinced that the old liquids just didn't have the potency that they used to have 15, 20 years ago. At the end of the day, they've been sat around on shelves for 15, 20 years, and I was just sure that they'd lost a little bit of that. You know, esters and oils obviously lose some of their attractiveness over time, and yeah, I just wasn't convinced that they were quite what they used to be. But just in the interests of a bit of nostalgia and having a bit of fun this trip, I thought it'd be nice just to dig some out from the cupboard, roll some baits, knock up a little one egg mix on the bank now, and yeah, maybe even try and catch one on one tonight. I think rolling singles, it's probably one of them things that you either love or you hate. I imagine for some lads, like, the thought of dealing with all this stuff, it's probably just an absolute ball ache and they're never going to do it. But I think for me, I don't know, like, again, it just transports me back to being a teenager, growing up in the Northwest, rolling single hook baits, and just having absolute faith in them. I think the thing back then as well was that you couldn't get incredibly good hook baits off the shelf. So if you wanted like an absolutely A1 hook bait, you just kind of had to roll it yourself. You kind of didn't really have any other option. And it was a definite edge back then. Definitely don't think that's the case these days. But still, for me, rolling hook baits, whether, you know, that's kind of big 24s to go to Europe with, or maybe making some other big hard hook baits for Europe with like a touch of white dye in or something like that, I think just kind of adds just to the whole process of carp fishing, you know. I enjoy it, just kind of transports me back to that era. Nice fresh eggs if you are rolling your own, kind of goes without saying. I always use the whole egg, white in the yolk, always worked well for me. Never really looked at this whole thing as an exact science. Like, there's all sorts of stuff going on here. You know, I think one thing that's apparent from looking at this blend that I've got here is that there's what, 4 or 5 different companies. NutriBaits gear, old Nash stuff, Solar, did some classics, a bit more NutriBaits, DT, John Baker, Hutchie, and Mainline. So good liquids, good bits, pulled from loads of different companies, you know, for different reasons. Like I say, I never had an exact science to it all in terms of levels or anything like that. It was just about playing around and working to a kind of basic concept of levels and putting different layers into it, and taking some principles from Tim's old book as well, and that original fruit special recipe. I think rolling singles, it's probably one of them things that you either love or you hate. But I think for me, it just transports me back to being a teenager, growing up in the Northwest, rolling single hook baits and just having absolute faith in them. I think the thing back then as well was that you couldn't get incredibly good hook baits off the shelf. So if you wanted like an absolutely A1 hook bait, you just kind of had to roll it yourself. Kind of didn't really have any other option. Yeah, there we go. I think back in the 90s, genuinely really was an edge. And now, it's just a fun, lovely thing to do once in a while.